Well, I don't want to paint too broad a brush because there are a lot of different American Christianities, obviously.
Of course.
And a lot of different Canadian Christianities. But speaking in generalities, if we're talking about sort of Republican American Christianity, Canada is I found fairly influenced by Europe's culture in that people tend to be not ashamed of their religion, but it's not considered a super polite topic of conversation with strangers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That's kind of
Like
nice.
if you're new to a neighborhood and your neighbor comes up and talks to you, they might ask like, "Hey, are you religious? Are you interested in going to church?" But they won't generally assume that you're Christian right off the bat, and you usually won't get too much flack for not being one.
That's good.
Just because there's a lot of different very visible religions and minority groups in Canada. So I find there's a lot less hostility.
On this episode of Not Gnostic, The X-Files number 4, Abby and I interview Matt. Here, we discuss the differences between American Christianity and Canadian Christianity. I think you'll find some interesting things in this episode, and overall it was just a lot of fun talking with Matt. Thanks again for staying tuned, and let's get on with The X-Files. One more time, thank you for joining us, Matt, and I guess I just want to start out by asking the question I generally start asking everyone, and that is, what's your Christian background look like?
So my entire extended family is Christian, so I was exposed to that right from the get-go. I think I sort of officially started saying I was a Christian at like 6 years old, and that carried on all the way through up until about 2 years ago.
Oh, wow. So from 6 years old until you were about...
22.
So you're 22, because you're 24 now, correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And...
that sounds about right for a lot of people. I feel like that was kind of my story.
It does. Actually, although mine went until I was like probably 25, so that's kind of sad, but no. Okay. So are you in college? Did you finish college? Or have you gone to college?
So I after high school, I went to a Christian university / college for a couple of years, but I didn't end up finishing there. I moved cities to get married, and that was about the time that me and my wife both deconverted. So we stopped going.
You both deconverted. Okay, so I mean,
Yes.
I guess in a way that's kind of lucky because
it's very fortunate.
On Reddit, at least, I've seen a lot of stories where, people, one person of the couple deconverts, but the other one doesn't, and it just kind of falls apart.
Right.
Because of that, although some couples can make it work, it seems, but it seems like it's very hard.
We would not have been able to make a mixed faith marriage work.
Yeah. I mean, you have to, step on eggshells all the time, or at the very least, the other person just cannot be very religious. To me, it seems like if you're going to have a, relation, like an interfaith marriage, basically. But, so, in the email you sent me, you actually mentioned that you were, studying apologetics is a hobby of yours.
Yes.
So, how far in, were you really into apologetics as a Christian as well, or did that come after the deconversion?
It started right at the end.
Okay.
I mean, growing up Christian, there's always little things that don't make sense, and sort of questions that you have that you sort of push back or don't get great answers to. And so when I was going to university, one of my things I'd been saying to myself for a few years was, when I get to this environment where everyone are educated Christians, that's when I'm going to start actually getting these solid answers. And when I wasn't getting them in classes, I started just looking for it on my own. So I started studying apologetics, and that's what kind of led me away from Christianity in the end.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
so something that's supposed to maybe bring you closer, give you answers, kind of gave you maybe an answer you weren't necessarily looking for at the beginning.
Yeah,
maybe.
Absolutely.
I mean, and again, it's another common theme, I think, actually. The more serious you get about the faith, the more you realize something's wrong with it, and or the more you think that maybe I'm not getting the answers that I should be getting. Why is none of this making sense, basically?
Mm-hmm.
And then, because a lot of people who are Christians, they probably haven't even read the entire Bible, Many people.
I would say that's definitely true.
They probably.
I hadn't.
I hadn't. I mean, I had read. Well, I was really trying to, but God, the Bible is so boring, and so
it's a very dense book.
It's so boring to read. So, I mean, when I was serious, like the most serious times during my faith, I tried to read it like all the way. I had started in Genesis, and I want to say I got more than halfway through the Old Testament before I deconverted, but I don't know. So,
it's the numbers hurdle.
It really is.
Yeah, the numbers hurdle.
Oh,
there you go.
Numbers
in Leviticus.
Numbers. Yeah. And the family line where it's just like an entire chapter dedicated to talking about like descendants and things like that. And I'm just like, this is so boring. What is the point of this? And I mean, they always, say there's a point to it in church, but I mean, like a good portion of Christians, I think, don't even know the Bible. Have you guys seen that YouTube video where people dress up the Bible as like the Mormon book or something? And then, or like some other book, they make it like unknown perhaps. And they go to people and they're like, they read all this stuff God does in the Old Testament. And they're like, wow, I can't believe that.
Yeah.
And then, in the end, the guy reveals that it's actually the Bible and everyone's super surprised about it. But that's generally how I feel like if most Christians took the faith seriously and like legit read and like reflected on what the Bible says, that there would probably be less Christians. So, but that's interesting. So was there a particular like kind of apologetic that really made you question, or like, I'm not particularly versed in apologetics myself, but was there a certain, like, I guess, topic in particular that really influenced your deconversion process?
There wasn't any one specific thing for me. One of the big things that I noticed is that the version of Christianity that apologists talked about was basically entirely divorced from the kinds of Christianity and the people around me. Just like the specific kinds of concessions that they would make, or the statements that they would make weren't really compatible with the Christianity that I was familiar with. So that was a little bit shocking. And that's when I sort of doubled down and started really taking things seriously, because I was like, okay, I must be wrong about a whole lot of things. And when I realized that, I had a bit of a what's his name? Descartes moment where I was like, okay, if I'm wrong about this, I could be wrong about everything. So let's back right up and listen to both sides, look at all the arguments, and see where this actually goes.
Yeah.
And then I'm just going to assume here over time you started siding with the opposite side. Is that?
Yeah. When I would listen to debates or something, I would always find myself agreeing with the atheist side of the debate. When I would read, a lot of authors will write responses to books and they'll go back and forth. When I would follow that chain to the end, I would always find that the atheist was making better points.
Yeah, and that's how it was for me. And I mean, I'm probably going to say this a lot, and I'm going to say that a lot. Anyways, throughout this show, but basically, I just opened my mind, like they tell you to do in church. Come in with an open mind. Don't let science influence you. Let what we say influence you. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to open my mind to both sides, see how that goes. And then over time, I just, I would, at first I argued like really, really hard for the Christian side. And, then, some of what I said was probably definitely apologetic in nature, but I just didn't realize it because, I mean, it's kind of natural to lean in that direction, even if you're not like an apologetic, like expert or what have you. So I would often argue for the Christian side. And then over time, I sort of stopped participating in debates and just read them a lot. And then I realized, well, actually what this atheist guy is saying makes a lot more sense now that I think about it. And over time, that's just kind of how the cookie crumbled for me. I guess, as well. So what sort of Christian sect or denomination were you from? Was it non-denominational?
So my family, for the last while, always went to the Alliance Church, which is just a sort of a generic Protestant denomination.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not sure how big they are in other places, but in Canada, that's a fair number of Christians go to Alliance churches. The one big difference from in my experience is there's not like a lot of, or really any that I remember, anti-science rhetoric.
Okay.
It's fairly reasonable in terms of like the teachings. I guess it's nothing too. They're not like growing up. I always kind of looked down on like Seventh-day Adventists or creationists, or it's like, oh, those aren't real Christians because they're being ignorant. And
yeah.
A big lesson that I remember is always like, God gave us a brain, and so we're supposed to use it to try and understand the world, and science does that.
Exactly.
The problem started to come in when science was disagreeing with doctrinal points, like, hey, it looks like being gay isn't actually harmful to anyone. What do we do with that?
Yeah.
So there was still some traditional views, but generally it's one of the more progressive, level-headed versions of Christianity that I've encountered.
Okay. That's interesting because, I mean, I don't know. When I was a Christian, I viewed my church as being very liberal and progressive, but in reality, they were probably one of the most conservative churches you could actually stumble into. And so just because they had this like love and acceptance sort of, face, and I mean, Abby can tell you all about that. He was kind of a leader in our church. But so like, that's interesting. What would you say the difference between like Canadian Christianity and American Christianity is? Do you feel like there's a difference between the two?
Well, I don't want to paint too broad a brush because there are a lot of different American Christianities, obviously.
Of course.
And a lot of different Canadian Christianities. But speaking in generalities, if we're talking about sort of Republican American Christianity, Canada is I found fairly influenced by Europe's culture in that people tend to be not ashamed of their religion, but it's not considered a super polite topic of conversation with strangers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That's kind of
like
nice.
If you're new to a neighborhood and your neighbor comes up and talks to you, they might ask like, "Hey, are you religious? Are you interested in going to church?" But they won't generally assume that you're Christian right off the bat, and you usually won't get too much flack for not being one.
That's good.
Just because there's a lot of different very visible religions and minority groups in Canada. So I find there's a lot less hostility.
Yeah, that's nice. Because it seems to be the complete opposite here or not here.
It seems that the rhetoric or the mission of the United States is completely different.
Yeah, I was about to say here, but Abby and I are in Japan, so I can't exactly say here. But in America...
Oh, in Japan, it's completely different.
I love Japan. I love living in Japan because there's no religion involved in politics at all. Although I can't say that. There's no Christian religion involved in politics at all. I don't know if Shintoism or Buddhism has effects or not really.
I might play
it might, but
ways,
I don't get that feeling at all, to be honest. But anyways, I digress. We're going way off topic. So what was my thought? Oh yeah, so like America seems to be completely, opposite to that. You'll have people who just automatically assume you're Christian, and so like their question won't be, "Are you religious?" It'll be, "What church do you go to?"
Yeah,
or it'll be
what I've heard a lot.
Or it'll be like, "When did you get saved?" or something like that. And, and then, if you're not, then they'll start pestering you to join a church, or they'll like immediately just try to like basically evangelize you and like try to get you into their whatever program they've got going on. So.
I know there's a not insignificant portion of Christians in America who are very frustrated that seems to be so prevalent. It's a shame that they don't have more influence.
Yeah. And, Abby and I, we went to a pretty... Well, I mean, again, Abby mentioned before that, like our church, was evangelical, but for the purpose of, as Abby says, filling the coffers, essentially. So, getting all that money, because that's, obviously on God's priority list. He, as George Carlin once says, all knowing, all powerful, all loving, all wise, but somehow just can't handle money. And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking at the differences between the countries, I think. But so,
yeah,
you mentioned your family. Is any of your family still Christian? Are you the only one who deconverted? Or
so far as I know, me and my wife are the only atheists in either of our extended families.
Okay.
Wow.
That's so your wife's family was atheist too. When did actually
our wife's family is Christian too?
Okay. When did she deconverted at the same time? Did she have the same reasons? I mean, if you feel comfortable saying that on the show.
So when we were coming up, just maybe 4 or 5 months before we were going to get married, we had both kind of mentioned that we were having some doubts. And so we kind of sat down and said, look, we don't want to go into a marriage with this still hanging over our heads.
Yeah.
So let's both take a couple of weeks on our own and really try and get to the bottom of this without influencing each other and where we end up, and then come back together and see what we have and then deal with that. So I wasn't really involved at all in the actual process of her deconversion. I know she read some of the same books I did. I think everyone's different, so it might be slightly different things that, lead people to lean one way or the other.
Right.
I know she's certainly a lot less gung-ho about it than I am. But
okay.
In the end, we both agree on basically every point in terms of rejecting Christianity.
That's good. I mean,
yeah.
That's probably the best outcome, to be honest, in that situation. So, have you told any of your families that you're no longer Christian, or if you did, how did they react, or how do you think they would react to that?
So we kept it quiet until after the wedding, just because we didn't really want to throw that into the mix. Planning a wedding's already kind of stressful. So did you end up
having a Christian wedding then?
We quietly kind of toned some of the Christian stuff down. But it helped because our wedding was very small.
That's good.
Neither of us are really, really big sort of party social people. So our wedding was basically just our immediate family, couple of cousins and grandparents, but so it was a really small, quiet event. So her grandpa did the ceremony, and whenever he does that, he usually likes to do a sermon, but we were like, hey, Grandpa, because it's just family, maybe we don't need to do that. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Sorry, go ahead.
But after the wedding, I think a couple of weeks after, we sat down and wrote out a big email and sent it out to all 4 of our parents and said, we'll let you guys decide how you want to talk to the rest of the family about that if you do. And
that's yeah.
So it's spread around, and so far as I know, everyone knows now. They don't really talk about it much.
Yeah.
Most of them just don't really seem comfortable addressing it, which on one hand is nice because there's no harassment or fights. But on the other hand, it's a topic that I really, really like talking about, and I don't get any chance to do that. So that's kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I could definitely see why that would be the case.
Tough. I mean, when, I told my dad I was agnostic, and I mean, he's not super religious, or, he's more the spiritual kind, the go on Sundays once a year kind of guy. And so he's not very strict about it. He was pretty chill when it came down to it. But I could feel a little bit of, I don't want to say disappointment. I still feel like that's a bit of a strong word, even in his case. But there's a bit of a, pushback when I was like, I don't really believe anymore. So take it as you will,
right?
Basically, but
there tends to be that pushback in a lot of what I find is really interesting. In a lot of these stories of deconversion, there's always a moment when this conversation comes up, and whether it comes up because it has to be said or some person just reaches their breaking point and they just have to say, I no longer believe these things, or they're able to have a intellectual conversation about it. I mean, I know with my family, we all sort of, in a way, deconverted at once to varying degrees. Some of us became much more, atheist, in percentage, I guess, if you were to compare it. But, that was a good thing for me, but even still, there was always uncomfortable things that me and my siblings even brought to our parents of going, these are the reasons why we deconverted, and they still weren't really on board with some stuff for a while, and it took them a long time to really kind of, accept stuff that I think a lot of millennials have gone, yeah, it's no big deal, like, gay marriage and things like that, marriage equality, essentially. It's like, why are we even debating that, and I think even the young churches started to shift their minds on that as well. But really, it's just interesting how that conversation always has to take place, and I feel like that is an integral part of the deconversion, to really kind of affirm your identity of what you believe and really kind of take root of your own ideologies, because for so long that you've been told what to believe, and you haven't had a chance to really be or think what you want, or say what you want.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely. And so you like to talk about this a lot. Is there anything in particular you like to discuss with regards to religion then? Or like maybe perhaps the deconversion process? Like what interested you most, I guess, during the deconversion process?
One thing that I get it and I don't get it. It's really hard to wrap my head around how many people can believe for such terrible, just like poorly thought out reasons. And like I've always been a really scientifically minded person and had a really good, is it okay if I swear?
Go ahead. We swear all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like a pretty good bullshit filter.
Yeah.
But it never went off for any of the ridiculous stuff that I was thinking about Christianity.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah.
That kind of compartmentalization is really interesting to me. And I think that, like, where I am now, I'm glad that I was able to break down those walls with some help.
Yeah.
And so I want to give other people that opportunity and say, like, even if you don't deconvert, like, let's find the best possible justification for your beliefs, so you're not spouting nonsense.
A compromise. Okay. Yeah.
Like I definitely have a chip in my shoulder about Christianity, and I, can't say I would be sad if people deconverted. But
me either.
When I talk to people, I don't want to attack their beliefs. I'm just,
of course,
like, you're saying a lot of really ridiculous stuff, and I can point that out. Like, let's figure some of this stuff out.
Yeah, it's interesting how much conversation changes when you're face to face with someone versus like over the internet. Yeah, it's easy to really like get angry online because you're not facing anyone. It's like you don't have to deal with like the relationship like repercussions later because you never knew the guy. So it's like if he thinks about it later, good for him. If he thinks I was an asshole, it doesn't affect me. Essentially. But when it comes to face-to-face interaction, I think most people would probably just they would be a lot more mature about it. In my mind, they would be like, okay, so let's deconstruct why you believe what you believe and what makes sense versus what doesn't make sense. And it's interesting how you mentioned how like the bullshit filter didn't go off when it comes to Christianity, because that's the same way with me, or it was the same way with me. It's like, because it felt like when I was a Christian, at least, it felt like no one else understood. I and my friends who are Christian, we were the only ones who understood it because we were Christian, basically. So it made sense to me why someone outside wouldn't understand. And it's like, and, when addressed with the problem of evil, people would ask when I was Christian, and I had talks with my, Christian friend, we would be like, we would talk about, the problem of evil. It would be like, so, we would talk about this guy and be like, so this guy brought up the question of evil, like, why is there evil in the world? And then my friend and I would like give each other obvious looks and be like, well, duh, God, he has free will.
Why is this even a
Obviously,
problem?
checkmate atheists. And so that's generally how our conversation went. And then over time, it's like you realize, like, okay, well, even with the issue of free will, God still sort of made everything. And if he knows everything, then, there are just so many issues with...
The answers aren't quite as airtight as you think.
Exactly. And then when you really start to deconstruct that, that's when you realize, like, wait a second, this sounds nice on the surface, right? It sounds really nice just saying it when you're not thinking about it, but when you actually stop and reflect, that's when things start to break down. And
Right.
And
well, it's funny with critical distance how that happens.
Yeah.
But, in the midst of it all, you don't see it. But at the same time, Christians are always kind of the first to point out, depending on their beliefs, even within Christianity, they're the first to point out, oh my God, can you believe, Buddhists believe this? Oh, can you believe that Hindus believe this? Isn't that just the wackiest crap you ever heard in your whole life? And you're going, I don't know, guys. I mean, I think the whole thought of God putting all the animals on a giant boat's pretty wacky as well. That's just as far-fetched as a lot of other stuff out there, if not more.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, people believe in ghosts and aliens. Yeah, well, so what? You believe in an almighty God, like, that created the earth in 7 days and, like, where the earth is only 10,000 years old and stuff, that's just like wacky. That's just, just as far-fetched as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's funny how Christians are the first to kind of point that out without ever really thinking, oh my God, maybe I believe in weird stuff too.
The more I look around, that seems pretty universal. Like, it's just across religious lines, across political lines, people just, we aren't naturally good at criticizing our own ideas. You need someone else to point out your own mistakes in thinking.
Powerful.
Yeah, you do. And it's funny, like, there's this saying, well, it's not really a saying, but a lot of times I'll hear, even just listening to podcasts, people say, like, yeah, my friend knew I was this before I even knew I was. And then, like, my friend knew I was, like, I didn't really believe even before I knew I didn't believe, you know what I mean, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's interesting. So after I heard that, I'm like, I asked my friend, I'm like, did you know I didn't believe when I thought I still believed? And he was like, yeah, I could kind of tell. I'm like, okay. It's weird how that works. So, because, I mean, over time, like, when you're Christian, like, your attitude starts, like, the deconversion process might not be obvious to you, but to other people, maybe it is. Like, maybe you stop going to church as often, or maybe you're not, maybe you don't defend the Bible as much as you used to over time, or things like that, and that's what tips other people off. So having other people there with you to, like, point out mistakes, in what you say or, like, your logic, I think helps a lot, and so when I studied abroad and met atheists who were nice people, and that really sort of influenced, I think, my deconversion process as well. So, well, okay, so I want to ask another question, though. Do you believe in an afterlife? Or, like, I guess I should start out by asking first, what do you identify as now?
Well, your astute listeners will notice that earlier in the episode I referred to myself and my wife as atheists. That's generally the label that I use.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not too concerned with specific, agnostic atheist versus Gnostic atheist versus just the agnostic label.
Yeah.
If I'm talking to someone, I prefer to say this is the set of things that I believe. What would you call that? And just sort of let them use the label that they're comfortable with.
Yeah,
because
that's a good way to go. Yeah,
a lot of people have sort of preconceived ideas about specific labels, and getting too hung up on specific words can just slow things down.
Absolutely.
So I'm pretty content to let other people tell me their definitions for things, and then go off of that. But personally, I think that atheist is the most descriptive thing for me.
Okay. So do you generally think that? So obviously you don't believe in a God. Do you think the chances, like, are high that there's an afterlife, or do you think that there's no chance at all?
Based on my extreme layman's understanding of neuroscience, there's no indication of an afterlife.
Right.
So I would then say it follows from that there's no reason to think that there is one.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's logical, you know? I mean, we only have the ability to observe our surroundings and sort of make observations based off of that, you know? No one has come back from the dead. I've not seen anyone come back from the dead. I've heard of, you know, ghost stories, you know, things where people saw some crazy shit. And I like those stories. I think they're fun. They're entertaining. But at the end of the day, they never managed to conveniently have a picture or photo or recording of any sort of like evidence with regards to that, you know. And then, yeah, there's so much evidence in support of there not being a continuation of death, at least as far as we can observe in the material world, or like where what we can see. And so that's the most logical conclusion. And to me, that would suggest that we should value this life far more than what we think, or what our, you know, what our religion teaches us comes after. You know what I mean? And so I think that to me, I mean, it also makes life a lot more interesting too. Like, you know, as Christians, we had the saying God did it, right? It's a pretty oversimplification of things. And although I guess some people argue that, you know, God did it is a pretty marvelous answer too. But in my opinion, not having all the answers is actually what makes life way more interesting. And even if, you know, you think like, you know, science like explains everything, if, you know, like, I mean, I personally don't think there's a God. For certainly don't think there's a God of the Bible. That's for sure. I'm gonna stick my head on a limb there and be like, 100% certain God of the Bible don't exist. And if he does, strike me down now, God. And yeah, so that's not gonna happen. And so yeah, I mean, it's just interesting. I like asking people what they think, because I know a lot of people who are atheists will still, you know, like to have an afterlife, you know, or something like that. And sometimes I think it would be kind of cool to have an afterlife and to just experience it. But at the same time, I mean, if nothing comes after, all you have to do is like think back to when you didn't exist. And it's like, do you remember any pain, suffering, or eternal torture in hell? I don't. So, I mean, what's there to be afraid of, really? So, but was there a certain point during the deconversion process when, like, you realized that everything was BS, or was it just a culmination of things? Like, were there a couple key points in, like, maybe the religious text or something of that nature that made you realize everything was definitely not what you thought it was?
Oh, let me think now. The whole process for me, like from the start of serious questioning to saying, okay, this is all nonsense, was a fairly short turnaround. It's probably about a 3-week period of just like real, like when I first moved out here, I wasn't working yet, so I basically just used all of my free time to study this stuff. And so 3 weeks, it was basically my full-time job. And it's a little bit of a blur now. I think that one really key point was losing. So really, really core to most apologetics is trust.
Yeah.
Christianity is really, really built on the idea that we can trust God because he's perfect.
Right.
And so losing that trust was pretty earth-shattering.
Yeah.
That, I think, was a pretty key point where I switched from going, okay, how can I figure out how to make this work, versus, okay, how much of this is nonsense? Yeah, most defenses to like the problem of evil or suffering, every bit of biblical nonsense, anything that doesn't make sense, is just trust that God knows what he's doing, or trust that he's doing the right thing, or he has his reasons, but it's always just sort of, it all rests on assuming that the God that they're following has their best interests in mind and is going to do the right thing. And yeah, losing that was just like incredibly painful. Because up until that
Yeah.
point, it was like, having a friend that you completely trust and you feel like has brought you through all these situations. Then you're like, wait a minute,
Sure.
there's a lot of reasons that this person isn't doing good things. And if arguments for their existence are predicated on them doing good things,
Yeah.
what's going on here?
Yeah. And that relates to the I guess the divorce you talked about earlier between what you thought Christianity was and what you saw people around you acting like, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that can be a major thing for a lot of people, I think. And they see that, okay, so this is supposed to so Christianity is supposed to be about love and acceptance. So why are you over there bashing that guy for doing whatever he did? Or why are you so against, again, gay marriage? Or because this is a strong thing right now in modern society, gay marriage. Texas just passed that crazy bill. Did you hear about that, Abby? What Texas passed recently?
I have not heard this, actually.
So, okay, apologies if I don't remember correctly. You can all murder me later if I forget or something. But basically the gist of the bill is that, so when it comes to adopting kids in America, Texas can basically, so certain organizations can basically deny people adoption rights based on whether or not they are affiliated with Christianity. So if they're LGBT, if they're non-Christian, if they're atheists, they can actually deny them the ability to adopt kids. And that bill legit passed. And so Texas is really racking up a sort of, reputation for
That's insane.
Intolerance when it comes to religious practices. But so that's the kind of divorce that I think of, at least in America. Was the divorce that extreme, would you say, Matt?
So for me, the actions of other Christians weren't actually too much of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I was not blind to Christian hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Canadian Christians, I think there's at least in my experience, a fair number of them like to sort of make fun of American Christians because of how
hey, it's
intolerant
all right.
and insane that
we do
saw
too.
them as being. So that wasn't ever really a huge problem for me.
Mm-hmm.
The disconnect for me was more in between who I thought God was versus who an honest reading of the Bible shows him to be.
God to be, yeah. And that's the thing, yeah. So I assume is that referring to what he does in the Old Testament and things like that?
Old and new, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Bigger than, because going to school, I had actually taken some Christian classes on the topic of genocide, and we touched on some Old Testament stuff. So that wasn't again, as long as the trust is there, there's not really any amount of baggage that can build up that can be a really big problem. For me, it was more the plan of salvation and how convoluted and stupid it seemed. Because when I guess the way I thought about it is if God loves everyone perfectly and wants as many people to be in relationship with him, even if he's respecting free will, it doesn't make sense for him to set up a system where people need to ignore reason and use faith in order to have a relationship with him.
Yeah.
If I want a relationship with someone, I just talk to them.
Exactly.
I don't, make them sort of, assume that this person probably exists and try and guess what they want. It's very, very imminent. And that combined with even sort of the kinder versions of Christianity with annihilationism.
Yeah.
Again, if I love someone and I want them to love me, if they don't, I'm not well, I guess they should be destroyed.
Burn in hell.
That's just annihilationism isn't burn in hell though. It's literally just you stop existing.
Yeah.
It's but it's just there's a big disconnect there. Why not just sort of have two nice places, one where you can be with God if you want, and one where you don't be with God if you want.
Yeah. And it's I mean, true love, true unconditional love doesn't require any sets of rules. It doesn't require, that you believe in someone absolutely without any proof whatsoever. And to send someone to hell for an eternity, especially given how long we live, which is a very insignificant amount of time in comparison to the rest of the universe, it just makes no sense. You don't even need evidence. It makes no sense to send someone to hell for that at all, especially if God is truly all-loving, all-knowing, and all-powerful, and all-just. And there are some Christians, though, to their credit, there are some Christians who will say that God is just. It doesn't mean that, everyone gets into heaven. And, like that, logically speaking, from like an argumentative standpoint, makes a little more sense, right? If you think about it from that. So there are Christians, although very, very few. I don't think there are very many who would, say that it's up to God complete. Like, I mean, they say it's up to God, but like in this regard, they would say like, just because you pray or like were baptized doesn't mean you saved. It's up to God in the end. And I don't think there are a lot of Christian communities that subscribe to that idea. But
yeah, I'm not sure how widespread Calvinism is. I know that I think it used to be a lot bigger. But so many arguments that Christians use now rely on free will, and Calvinists don't buy into that at all. So I'm not sure what the numbers are there.
Well, everyone wants to be saved. Everyone wants to get into like an eternal paradise of happiness, or, in my opinion, I mean, the idea of heaven just kind of sucks, to be honest with you. It's like, you just, I don't even know what it is. Some people I think have this idealized version of heaven where it's like, planet Earth, only you can't sin, which I don't even know what that looks like. And even that in itself sounds like hell, because what am I going to do without alcohol? But I mean, and then, or another thing is like, it's like, another one is like you spend an eternity worshiping God. I'm like, what does that look like? Does that mean you like spend an eternity in the fetal position praying? Because that doesn't sound fun either.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so many people have this idealized version of heaven, and everyone wants to be saved. Everyone wants to think that they're taking the narrow road, when in reality, you look at the tens of thousands of denominations within Christianity alone. And then on top of that, you look at all the religions of the world, and to think that one person got it right is pretty, I don't know, crazy.
Well, and it's always interesting
Pascal's
too.
Wager.
Yeah.
What was that?
The reverse Pascal's wager.
Yeah, but go ahead, Abby. Did you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say, I think it's the promise of the afterlife is such a big tenet, or such a big pull for Christianity. You're promised eternal life if you follow Jesus. And that's a great thing. I mean, I guess some people could say, I don't want to live forever. But I mean, in some regards, death is, it has its own fear to it. And it can be scary because it's so final. But it's always interesting to me how people have portrayed heaven. Even heaven's portrayed as this big, grandiose, beautiful place with streets of gold, and I don't even think there's necessarily even biblical scripture to provide any evidence for that. I always kind of view heaven as this kind of meager place.
Sounds
that was
pretty materialistic, right? I mean,
yeah, it sounds pretty materialistic. Sounds pretty opposite of even what Jesus preached. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Heaven is made
of
gold.
To me, okay, well, what is that saying right there? Heaven's not this materialistic place. Well, you can have any item, any food, anything you want. I guess if heaven did exist, I pictured it as this kind of meager place where all of a sudden these just crazy American capitalists show up and they realize, what the hell? Where's my reward for all the good things and all the good things I did for God? And it's like your reward wasn't gold. It wasn't anything material. It was living a satisfied life, a life selfless for others. And really, I think if we're going to take anything out of Christianity, maybe we take something like that. I mean, I think you can find evidence or a thread of that in the scripture, but I don't know. I guess the promise of the afterlife, or what it's been turned into in the American faith at least, it really does a lot of damage to people because it, forces them to, I don't know, I guess,
do things. Yeah.
allow the, form God into this, rich thing that I don't know. I mean, if there's a God, he's the God of the poor, and he's the God of the disenfranchised, and the God, for the people that are down and out, and not for the rich asshats running Wall Street. That's bullshit. And I know that's kind of a bit of a tangent, but it's just interesting to me how heaven's always portrayed that way, and it's interesting how heaven, just ultimately, that's the end goal. Is just I want to get to heaven and live forever.
It's
That's
so
really
materialistic, so materialistic,
right?
right? It's like people preach this whole separation from the materialistic world, and yet, our church was always about mansions for you in heaven, or.
They take that scripture out of context. I go to prepare a place for you. I don't think that scripture really meant God. Jesus is up there building you a mansion. It's
well,
like,
he was
Jesus,
a good carpenter.
really? Like,
yeah. Well, he was.
Yeah, he was a carpenter. That
Maybe
is true.
he is building us mansions. Maybe we capitalists
That's
got
why
it
the
right.
second coming's taking so long.
For all we know.
Oh, maybe
so many people that need houses.
I don't know.
Holy
By this
shit.
point, my mansion's probably been taken
I think,
down.
I mean, that's got to be it. I mean, mansions take a long ass time to build. You need capital. Maybe that's why churches need money all the time.
He's got to get a lot of
You
construction
need money
permits
for it
and
too.
stuff,
So it's like, I mean, you got to have people mansions don't build themselves. Okay, money doesn't grow on trees in heaven. So, holy shit.
It doesn't grow on trees on earth either.
It makes sense.
That's bullshit. It should be growing on trees
God.
if it's going to be heaven.
That is like the best connection I've ever seen made. But
if I could back up just a tiny bit.
Go ahead.
What's interesting to me is that most of the time the Bible talks about heaven, it's talking about these are the ways you get there, or these are the ways you disqualify yourself. And I think that that's very smart, because people want different things, and the more specific you get when you're describing what's supposed to be perfect paradise, the better the odds are you're going to say something that your audience doesn't want to hear.
Yeah.
Like you touched on with, heaven is worshiping God forever, or heaven is mansions. Like, not everyone wants that stuff. So if you're trying to, if heaven is the carrot, then you can never get too specific with what you're calling perfection.
Yeah. And if you don't mind me, do you have anything else to say? I just want to...
No, go ahead.
So that's funny that you say that. So, because, the Bible thrives off of ambiguity. Before this, Abby and I were discussing, just the ambiguity of the Bible and things like that. And it lives off of that, because it's it's so ambiguous when it comes to so many certain things. And we talked about, mansions in heaven, right? And so but that was with our things. Have you guys ever heard of, Jesus will give you crowns? Have you heard of that one before?
It sounds familiar, but I don't think it was something that was particularly emphasized for me.
Familiar.
So I'm not exactly sure how it went, but I believe in a certain sect of Christianity, if you if you the more people you bring to Jesus, basically the more crowns with jewels in them you get for heaven, or maybe the more good things you do, the more crowns or jewels, jewel encrusted crowns, basically, you get in heaven. So, again, it's materialist. And then, Abby, like you said, with the, roads of gold. I mean, that's so materialist. Right. So materialist. It's like...
Yeah, it's so rooted in...
It's incredibly...
how we view what is worthy in the world, right? Gold has this value that we've aesthetically, for some reason, ascribed value to it, when in reality it's so abstract. Gold really has no value in itself. It's just it was given value.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. It is interesting, and it's frustrating. I think even within a lot of the doctrines, like Mormons, from what I understand, believe in different levels of heaven. So a lot of people get into heaven, but you can just be kind of a low. So that's interesting to me. This idea of a class system in heaven. Then what a class system exists. That sounds terrible.
I first learned about that.
There's no equality.
It's and that is
Jehovah's Witness believe that there's only a certain amount of people that go. I believe because they take it out of Revelations, the 144,000. So only 144,000 people are going to go to heaven. Everyone else like kind of stays on earth, and it's like just the new earth for that God makes. And they don't really believe in hell, which is from what I hear from some of my friends who were part of that faith. But I don't know. It's interesting, and maybe our listeners can correct us if I'm wrong on that. But
yeah,
those are kind of two.
And I do want to just say here to anyone listening, feel free to correct us at any time. By no means, when we start getting out of the realm of Christianity, or even our own sect of Christianity, are we experts. So that's all I just want to say. But no, the materialist view of heaven is just so funny to me, just because they constantly preach about separating yourself from, the materialist world and being all spiritual, and yet, it's like everyone talks up.
And then at the end of the day, you receive everything.
Exactly. You get eternity. You get
heaven.
eternal. Yeah, you get eternal life. Like, it's all.
Yeah, there was kind of a bumper sticker going around for a while, like that guy. It was like, "Don't laugh at me or my car, my treasure's in heaven." And it was like, oh my God, give me a break. You're trying to act like so not materialistic, like, oh yeah, I just drive this shitty car, but like really, like, I don't know. You're just, I really hated that bumper sticker. It really made me mad.
Yeah. So, this has been a really awesome episode. But so you mentioned earlier, Matt, that your grandpa does a sermon. So I'm gonna really back this up. During like the wedding, is your grandpa a pastor then, or does he just take it seriously?
So it was my wife's grandpa.
Right. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, it's no worries. No, he's not a pastor, but he is a very deeply religious person. So he is like constantly. Like he'll evangelize to anyone. He's a very, very outgoing, friendly guy. So he has no problem just approaching people to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
So sermons are just kind of a part of that for him.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my family, and more so my side than my wife's, have been very heavily involved in church, though.
Yeah.
So none of them are like my dad, for example. He's not a pastor, but he gives sermons in church sometimes, just because he is often involved in church leadership.
Yeah.
And he's a professor as his job, so standing up and giving lessons is old hat to him.
Okay. So he knows his stuff, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
My family generally takes their religion very seriously, but they're not. Most of them aren't pastors per se.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, when I went to my friend's wedding, it was very Christian. I was a groomsman for that, and very like misogynistic. It was like, the whole. I think he had his pastor actually come and do a small sermon, where not really a sermon, but like when they did the vows, there's a lot of traditional rhetoric thrown in, and I didn't realize like how uncomfortable it was going to be, because I was a Christian for 7-ish years, so I guess not as long as a lot of people, but so I sat through that, and it was like you must submit to your husband just as Jesus submits to the head of God and stuff like that, and it was like really traditional. And and during the pray time, like there's prayer before the wedding, and I was just like, please don't ask me to pray because I have not prayed in a long time. So, but no, yeah, Christian weddings, they can get pretty traditional, that's for certain. So it's good that you were able to at least, though, dial that back a bit. But
we ultimately kind of viewed the wedding as it ended up turning out as more for our families than anything else. And I don't think that's uncommon. A lot of people end up doing stuff in their weddings just to make their families happy. But I think might have been to a slightly greater degree with us.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess we are kind of approaching the hour mark here. Is there anything like you wanted to talk about on this show in particular? Like, is there a topic you really wanted to address? I know, you mentioned you don't get a lot of chances to talk about these things, but is there something you wanted to ask us maybe, or maybe there's like a topic you wanted to discuss or not?
I think that if there's one point that I always want to hammer home with anyone who I can get a chance to talk to about is just, and like you guys have been great. This is just sort of because you have an audience. Be charitable in your discussions. Mm-hmm. And if you're having a debate with someone or a conversation or whatever, just don't attack them and don't assume anything that they believe. Okay. Even if they like, right. And again, like I don't want to just sound like I'm lecturing you guys. This
is no, not at all. Don't even feel like that. Yeah.
If someone says they're a Baptist and you're familiar with Baptists, don't hold them accountable for every stupid thing any Baptist has ever said. Mm-hmm. Just just like, you know, how I let other people tell me how they like to define stuff. Don't tell them what their Christianity is or does. Mm-hmm. Let them do that for you, and then talk about what they actually believe.
Yeah.
In so many conversations I see, people will immediately jump to something like Trinitarian theology and how stupid it is. And then someone's like, well, I don't really subscribe to that. And then the person who brought it up just looks ignorant, and it doesn't move the conversation forward.
Right.
If you're interested in, you know, finding truth and helping other people, you've got to be, just charitable. You've got to show that you're someone who's actually reasonable and willing to talk with them.
Right.
And not sort of go on these big tangents that aren't relevant to their specific beliefs.
Exactly.
That's something.
Right. No, that's really powerful.
Think, you know, we have the tendency to get super attached to labels. And, you know, especially when it comes to atheism. Atheism in itself doesn't really offer anything, you know. It's not a worldview, you know, it's not. So I think it's important to just, that's really great advice. You know, even I could use that advice because, you know, I have the tendency to, you know, tell people what atheism is or isn't, or like what agnostic atheism is or isn't. When in reality, it's like everyone has their own, you know, preconceived ideas about what something is. And if you want to have like the most, I guess, productive discussion, then you just let people sort of define what they want to define and then go from there, basically. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really good. Yeah. But do you have anything else to add, Abby, as well? Or
no, I think that's great. Yeah. I think that's great. I mean, I think we've talked about that a lot, Matt, and we believe in that. And I think it's important with anyone talking about religion or faith, or, you know I came from a community a lot like yours in a sense, in the sense that, you know, my family were deeply involved with the faith and were pastors and elders in the church. And, you know, leaving that is really hard. And I've always been the type of person to want to, even though I don't stand with a lot of what that was at the time, I want to stand on the side of I'm going to still care about people and be compassionate, because I realize how difficult it was to come to light in terms with what I believe now, but also leaving the community meant I lost a lot of friends. And so I think that, you know, when you're leaving the community, or when we're comparing faiths, or when we're comparing doctrines, or when we're comparing anything like that, it's really important to follow that path of listening and creating dialogue, because otherwise you get nowhere. And that's been my long-time problem with a lot of atheists, you know, and I'm kind of labeling them here now, of course, and that's been my problems with even Richard Dawkins. I don't think he has any grace, you know, in his soul to really care for people that have left that community and how difficult it's been for them. He kind of sees, you know, people who are in faith, or they're sheep, they're weak, they can't do anything themselves. Well, that's not true. That's just not true at all. A lot of people of faith are very self-sufficient and very brilliant people.
I'll have you know.
They just found a community that works.
I'll have you know, I am reading Richard Dawkins right now, and I take so much offense to that. Okay, I just killed the discussion. Sorry. Okay. Just kidding.
No.
But, no, I am reading him, but I personally don't see it that much. But we'll just again, we're just kind of like proving more that people define things differently. So, but yeah, I guess I just want to say, so really quick to kind of end this. If anyone listening to this would like to also come on and, you would like to share your experiences in religion or Christianity, any religion, not just Christianity, it can be anything. And, or maybe you're an expert on a particular topic, go ahead and reach out to us at notgnosticpodcast@gmail.com. One more time, that is notgnosticpodcast@gmail.com. And once again, Matt and Abby, thank you for joining me on this episode of Not Gnostic.
Yeah, thanks for having me.